Hi, this is Anton from the Terra team.
In this video, we'll give you an overview of the different methods for ingesting data into an existing dataset within the Terra Data Repository, and we'll explain the prerequisite steps necessary to set yourself up for data ingestion, including how to set the proper permissions on the Google bucket from which you ingest your files.
There are two aspects to ingesting data in the TDR: ingesting files such as BAMs and CRAMs, and ingesting the metadata associated with those files, including the paths to the files. Ingesting the files by themselves will store them in the virtual file system associated with the dataset, but they will not be visible to any user through the Terra Data Repository user interface, including the dataset's custodian, and they won't show up in any snapshots. In order for the list of files to be populated in any of the data tables in the user interface, you will need to ingest metadata pointing to those files. There are several strategies for ingesting files and metadata. Let's go through the options. The first option is to ingest individual files. Ingesting files individually is most useful when you're testing the ingestion process. Rather than wasting time and money on a bulk ingestion that doesn't work, you can ingest individual files and add the metadata later one by one. The second option is to ingest multiple files in bulk. If the file ingestion process is working in the way you want it to, and you're ready to ingest an array of files, you can either use a method in which you input a JSON array directly into the API request body in the API user interface, or you can stage an external JSON control file and pass that as an input to the API, depending on which style suits your needs. These options can help you programmatically ingest data. The third option is ingesting CSV tables. Once the files are stored in your dataset's virtual file system, you'll want to ingest the metadata that populates those files to the data tables. Again, without the metadata, the files won't actually be visible when you're working with the snapshots or viewing the dataset, even if you're the custodian. The rows that actually populate the columns of the dataset contain the metadata that refers to the files. In order to see the files, you'll need to ingest metadata that's associated with those files. The simplest way to do this is by uploading properly formatted CSV tables. However, you can also use JSON inputs, which may be useful especially if you're generating such JSONs programmatically. And finally, the fourth option is combined file and metadata ingestion. You can ingest your files and metadata at the same time in one step. This is essentially the same as ingesting metadata with a JSON, only it requires a slightly more orchestrated JSON that has JSON objects nested within it for each file being ingested. In order to do any of these methods, there will be three prerequisites. The first is that you need a billing ID that links you to your GCP billing account. If you don't have your billing ID handy, you can use the Enumerate Profiles API endpoint to list all of the billing IDs to which you have access. You can list all of the billing IDs associated with the email you're logged on with. Remember, as a best practice, you should use the same billing ID when working on a given dataset. The second thing you'll need is the UUID for the dataset where the data will go. The most convenient place to find the UUID for a given dataset is to go to the Terra Data Repository user interface, click on the dataset you're interested in, and take this portion of the URL. And finally, you'll need to set the proper permissions for the Google bucket from which you'll be ingesting data. To do this, you need to add 2 email accounts to the permission list for that bucket with the role Storage Object Viewer. The first email is the Data Repo Service Account email, shown here, and the second email account is your personal proxy group account, which you can find under your profile in the Terra user interface. Once you've added both of these to the permission list for that Google bucket as storage object viewers, you'll be able to ingest files from that bucket. Now we're ready to ingest some data.
In the next video, which is called Ingesting Data Part 2, we'll go through some hands-on demonstrations of each one of the methods described in Part 1.